Hi everyone, and very warm welcome to my session at this year's edition of the Festive Tech Calendar 2023. My name is Viktor Hedberg, and we're going to talk about the possibility of actually dumping conditional access policies on any tenant using nothing else but end user permissions, basically. Before we kick things off, please remember to donate to the Raspberry Pi Foundation, which is the target organization for this year's Festive Tech Calendar. And while I have your attention, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to the people behind the Cloud family, which makes all these amazing Festive Tech Calendars happen. This is one of my favorite events of all year because we get unhindered access to 31 days of amazing content from community contributors worldwide. Head on over to the Just Giving page to submit your donation to the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and let's meet that target goal of £5,000. So a quick introduction about myself. On the image here, you can see I had a lot more hair than I do. So that's one of the bad things with getting older, I guess. I work at a cybersecurity company in Sweden called TrueSec. We specialize in, cybersecurity, both in proactive terms, strategic, infrastructural, development, red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming, basically your go-to partner when it comes to cybersecurity engagements. I'm a security MVP. I work in the incident response department at TrueSec. So far during 2023, we have logged more than 32,000 work hours in different incident response engagements. So it's been a hectic year for us this year as well. And we're striving every day to help companies stay safe and return to normal operations after being hit by some sort of cybersecurity incident response. I do fill a little bit with security research, which is, one of the things that I'm going to share with you today regarding the conditional access things that you can actually do inside of a tenant. I'm a published author. I have published 2 technical books, one on the topic of SC400, the Information Protection Administrator exam, with my friend Shabastar. It's been out for soon 2 years. So if you're interested in taking that exam, feel free to purchase that copy. And the more recent published book is the one called Mastering Microsoft 365 Defender, which is kind of a fun story in itself because both of these books were released months or a couple of weeks before Ignite. And both of these books needed some big rewrites after Ignite has happened. So fair warning to all of you considering writing a technical book that product names changes from year to year. I'm a father. I have 3 wonderful sons together with my wife, and we live in our little home, our little house in south of Sweden. So what will this session actually look into? Well, we will look into why I constructed a tool to export Azure AD Entra ID settings. We will look into a little bit more information regarding the Azure AD Graph API. And then we will actually take a deep look into the different findings that I got out of constructing this little PowerShell module. And lastly, we will look at detection and prevention capabilities using Microsoft security tools inside of your tenant. So, the Azure AD export. I constructed a module called TSX Azure AD export to basically dump Azure AD configuration. Why, you ask? Well, We wanted a way using native PowerShell to get quick insights into a tenant. How many users are there? How many synced objects are there? How many role assignments exist inside of the Intro ID tenant, etc., etc., etc. Why we chose to go native PowerShell is, well, due to the fact that we wanted to be as minimalistic in our invasiveness as possible. So we wanted to be limiting the footprint that we leave inside of any tenant, both during incident response engagements and, of course, before incident response engagements. So this led to me configuring or creating a little PowerShell module, which actually relies upon other modules presently, but it's a work in progress. So hopefully early next year, we will have a fully operational standalone module, not requiring any other installation for it to work. But as you can see, these are the things that we can do using this module. We can export admins, company information, conditional access policies, devices, directory settings, groups, users, and guest settings, guest invite settings, all those kinds of things. And as I said, what it does is that it exports the current configuration into either a comma separated file, a CSV file, or a JSON file. The native tools inside of Azure AD PowerShell or MS Online PowerShell modules, they don't really give that readability that easily. So if you've ever tried to export a conditional access policy using the Azure AD PowerShell module, you just end up with a bunch of GUIDs telling you which GUID of user is included into the policy, or which groups are included or excluded, etc., etc., etc. So what we wanted to do is actually export all of this into a fully readable format where we can look into, okay, how are things configured, which users can do what, the state of the tenant, basically. And as I said, it does currently rely on 3 different modules, so it's a bit of a spaghetti code at the moment, but we're working on limiting this to being a self-sustained module as soon as possible. Is it publicly available? It isn't. Once it's completed, it will be published on GitHub, where I will provide a link for anyone interested in actually finding this and using it yourself. But as of now, it resides in our private repo with no external access allowed. So some example output of the TSX Azure AD PowerShell module. We can see here we have some conditional access policies. We can export roles inside of the tenant that we're looking at. And we can see groups, etc. And as you can see, it's basically, we get all the members, we get all the dynamic queries for groups, we get conditional access, we get roles, etc., etc., etc. So talking about the AAD Graph API, that's the APIs that we're using in these PowerShell modules, is that, well, while it is on a deprecation path, June 30, 2023 went by and it's still working. Microsoft came out and said that the deprecation has been postponed from September 30, 2023. That was the intended date for all commandlets inside of Azure AD Graph APIs. This has been postponed until March 30, 2024. However, I personally have a hard time seeing that actually coming to pass as well, because the MS Graph module is not quite there yet, and there are a lot of internal dependencies on the Azure AD Graph APIs. So I'm thinking that we might have to live with these APIs for a bit longer, but that's just my personal note on that. So, some findings. Well, we are able to look at the APIs directly to actually get the conditional access policies. As you can see in the URI parameter, we're using graph.windows.net, which is the Azure AAD Graph APIs. And we're actually getting a response using access tokens for this tenant. Now, inside of one of my idols in Azure AAD Graph API security research, in that module that Dr. Nestori Sinime configured called AAD internals, we can actually call these commandlets like get AAD int conditional access policies right off the bat, just providing the access token for Azure AAD Graph API. And we can actually grab all of these things right off the bat. So as you can see in the policy detail in this get AAD conditional access policy response, we have everything that we needed to export these conditional access policies. They're not in a readable format though, so what I did was to take the output in the policy detail field and loop that through using the native Azure AD PowerShell module and the MS Online PowerShell module to actually look up the locations, the users, the groups, etc., converting all of these non-readable GUIDs into a human-readable format. Output that into a JSON file, and we can see, hey, this is how the conditional access policy is actually configured in your tenant. So we're able to do it as an admin. That's what I did on the previous screen. But what about end users? So yeah, it's perfectly possible to do so using nothing more in terms of permissions than being an end user. This was reported to the MSRC, and the response that they came back with is, you reported that the users in the tenant can list all conditional access policies by using his login credentials. This seems by design, as a valid user in the tenant can list all conditional access policies. So this is another by design. However, this is, well, a security risk, at least, regarding your tenant security. A malicious actor, if they gain access to your tenant and are able to dump your conditional access policy framework, they can use that information to target their next victim. So which paths are configured in conditional access policies? Which devices do I need to compromise? Which users do I need to compromise? Etc., etc., etc. So let's look into how this actually can be performed. So let me just pull up my virtual machine that I have going here. So we can see here, inside of this Azure AD tenant, I'm logged in as an end user, and we're unable to go into the security portion of this tenant. You can see here, there's nothing shady going on. This is my own tenant. I'm logged in as a regular user. We're not able to grab any conditional access policies whatsoever. But we can log in using AAD internals to actually look at these things. So let us provide a little password for getting that token. Okay, so we have an access token for Azure AD Graph API. So if we want to get AAD int conditional access policies, we provide that access token. And we're getting a bunch of interesting things right off the bat. So we can see here that we have a PAW policy configured. It contains this block of information. So it's all users, let's see, all applications, specific roles are included. Now this one is a global admin role. I immediately recognize it from the GUID, but we want to actually look this up to see, hey, in plain text, what does this policy cover? So we see it also excludes a couple of users. It includes some devices, all devices. It excludes a specific device ID, to be honest. Basically telling me that, hey, this policy will block access for global admins unless they're coming from this device ID. So this is really interesting because if I was a malicious actor, I can now take that into consideration, use that to try to attack that device ID directly. We also have all the other policies configured in this tenant. We see here that the policy detail field gives us a lot of information regarding how the policies are configured. But as I said, it doesn't really tell us everything about these. So if we see here, it's a require MFA policy. There are some excluded. So I want to find out who are these excluded users. And here we have a lot of included roles for the require auth strength for admin conditional access policy. But as you saw, this is perfectly doable as an end user because, well, we're using the Azure AAD Graph APIs, which is, yeah, by design, according to Microsoft Security Response Center. We can actually reuse this token to connect MSOL service. We can see here that, hey, I can connect to the little MSOL module using that particular access token, which is nice. I can also use this token to connect to Azure AD PowerShell module, but for that we actually need the tenant ID and we need the user ID. The user ID is already here, so let's pop that into a variable. That's our user ID. And well, we're actually logged in here, so we can just grab the tenant ID right off the bat. We'll paste that into our second variable called TID. And we can now run the connect Azure AD using AAD access token. Let's provide that with our access token. The tenant ID is our TID, and we have account ID is our UID. So hey, we're connected to the same tenant using the access token that we grabbed from AAD Graph API. We can see a bits and pieces of information, but if we try to run the get Azure AD MS conditional access policy, and we provide, well, we don't have a policy ID. You see, we can't do this because, well, we don't have a policy ID to look for. If we try to do this one again, AAD int conditional access policies, we provide the access token, we grab the policy ID of this, we call it PID, not process ID, so policy ID. We call it policy ID because we can't use PID, sorry. And we do the get Azure AD MS conditional access policy ID, Well, we can't. It says object reference not set to an instance of an object. We are not allowed to use native PowerShell as an end user, which makes total sense because the the portal is blocking us as well. But, however, if we, as I said, use this commandlet and we loop through each of these little blocks of information regarding which users are included, excluded, groups included, excluded, etc., using the other PowerShell modules, Azure AD, MS Online, those kinds of things, we can actually export this in a readable format, just as being an end user. So let's do that. So we run the export TSX Azure AD. We specify an output path, which is, excuse me. We specify an output path. We hit enter. Currently, the code is configured in such a way that I need to grab a new access token. So let's sign in again using the same username, the same password. And now we're gathering conditional access policies. So we're looping through all of these policies that we saw outputted previously. And we're constructing a JSON file containing all the necessary information that we're looking for, being the bad hackers that we are in this case. Or in any case, performing a security review and you don't have admin permissions on your account. Well, you can use this to snoop around anyway. I usually tell my customers that I have these kind of reviews for that. Well, you don't need to create an account for me. You can just, give me a guest access and I can actually go from there. Because usually, well, things are configured in such a way that we can actually get through and look at the stuff that we're interested in anyway. But as you can see here, we have the conditional access policies dumped already in a JSON file. We can see the usernames of the included users. We have the excluded users. And all of these really interesting stuff requiring MFA, for instance. Hey, we have a couple of accounts that are excluded. These might be interesting in trying to attack because, well, this looks like a break glass account, which gives me a sense of, hey, we can actually attack that account. Do we have any administrative roles that are excluded? So it doesn't look like it. It looks for any role that says administrator. And all of these are protected by MFA. So, well, if we use evil jinx, we can try to fish our way into this tenant. But as you can see here, here's the PAW policy that we saw previously in the PowerShell prompt. It's included the company administrator role or the global administrator role. We have some excluded users. And they say that, hey, if you're a global admin, you need to come from this device, else you're blocked from accessing the environment. But here we have the name of the little bad boy right off the bat. So I mean, now we know which users to attack, we know which devices to attack and all of that stuff without having any admin access at all. So yeah, this is perfectly doable, perfectly possible. We get all of these things readable, which is, nice. Might be a bad thing if we're talking, let's try to protect our tenant, but this is the way things are at the moment. So, with that said, let's go back to the presentation and see. Okay, detections. what can we do to detect this kind of action going on inside of our tenant? Well, we can see that we get some sign-ins on the Azure Active Directory PowerShell application. However, that application itself is not governable by conditional access. So we can't say that, hey, you need to be an admin, or you need to be in this group, or you need to be in that location to use this application. We just can't enforce those kinds of policies on the Azure AD PowerShell itself. We can, however, use custom detections inside of Microsoft 365 Defender, Microsoft 365 XDR. So let's actually look at how that can be done. So we need to sign into the security.microsoft.com. We'll use an admin account in this case. Provide a little password. We approve the MFA, of course. You need to have MFA configured. Let's see if we can get that going. So I'm just unlocking the little authenticator app. And you provide the numbers. Approve the sign in, and we are in. So if we're going to advanced hunting, we can actually detect these sign-ins. If we say that, hey, we want to find all non-admins signing into Azure AD PowerShell, there's actually a way of doing that inside of the Custo query language. Let me just try to get my browser working as intended. Here we go. So we have a query right here, which looks for the identity info table where assigned roles is null. We pull out the account display name and the account object ID, and we look inside of the AAD sign-in events beta, looking at the application ID for Azure AD PowerShell, where we have a successful sign-in. So let's try and run this query. We'll see if we get any hits. No results found in a specified time frame. That means that, well, the sign-ins that we did previously are not registered in here yet. But as if we go back to the presentation, we can see that, yeah, this actually works. We get the object ID, we get the user itself, and of course the application ID where the sign-in was attempted. Now, so for the detection part, this is the best I can come up with. I'm all ears if someone can find a better way of detecting this. But this is something that we need to do in order to prevent this, or actually detect this when it's happening. And on the topic of prevention, what can be done to prevent this? So there's really not that much that can be done. There are a couple of things inside of this one that we can look at. So we have the user permission to read other user enabled, which is true by default. If we switch that into false, then yes, we cannot look up any users in our tenant using Azure AD PowerShell. However, that will also break a lot of things in your tenant, such as giving access to, adding Teams members or adding roles inside of Azure or anything like that. Unless you're an Azure AD, in an Azure AD role, you can't do any of those things. So it will break your tenant to a great extent. But as I said, yeah, preventing, well, other things you can look at is to not have PowerShell installed on end user devices and only allowing trusted devices to access your network. So compliant devices, using geofencing in terms of IP ranges where access token can actually happen, access token issuance can happen. But other than that, we're kind of at road's end here. So we have a couple of detections, we have a couple of things we can do to prevent this, but there's no way of actually turning this off. So to summarize things, the retirement for Azure AD Graph API will probably happen in the future. No set date yet, at least not one that I fully believe in. What I've just shown you can be used and is used by malicious actors today to snoop around in your tenant. And it will not get fixed because, well, you guessed it, Azure AD Graph API is on a deprecation path and therefore will no longer receive any updates. The detection I showed you is kind of wonky right now. And as soon as we have a working detection constructed, we will share that with you on truesec.com to get the word out. That's all I had. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to my session. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. And happy holidays, happy new year, all of that. Thank you so much. Bye.